The night presses close. You step from the low doorway, and the cold takes your breath, as if it were a thing to be tasted, a metallic tang that bites at tongue and lungs and makes your teeth ache. Frost nods from the thatch, and the thin light of stars looks far off and indifferent. You are somewhere that could be any small community in a colder age, where each hearth is a claim on warmth, where a single ember may mean the difference between waking and not waking. It is winter, in a time that measures years by harvest and furnace, and the air tastes of smoke and hard bread. A child clutches a carved horse, while an elder shields a bowl with a cloth, the steam fogging between their faces. And the world beyond the door seems patient and dangerous at once. Today, you will walk with a village through its longest cold, learn the small rules that keep bodies alive and communities intact, the bargains struck in whispers by the firelight, and the rituals that turned fear into purpose. If this kind of journey moves you, like and subscribe and tell us where you are watching from now. Dim your lamps, fold your hands if you need, and come with me into a time when warmth was the most valuable currency. The cottage you step into is a world shrunk to its necessary edges. Inside, the hearth is a central geography, a low stone hem where embers live and the air catches and softens. You are immediately aware of the textures: rough wool pressed against skin, a circle of straw that still smells faintly of summer, the sour note of stored cheese, and the shielded sweetness of fermenting ale. The walls are eaten in places by smoke, blackened in a careful map of seasons. A pot hangs above faint flames. Steam threads toward the rafters and brings with it the smell of barley and dried root. At the heart of the scene, a woman named Alda lifts her hands toward the pot and pulls the cloth tight over a bundle of roots. Her palms are cracked and ashy. Tomas, who keeps the long knives and is the one who knows how to split wood without losing the blade to cold, runs his thumb along the haft of a small axe and listens for the evening village bell. Brother Ewan, who writes thin records and prays for the souls of harvest and herd, murmurs a calendar year as if it were a rosary. You hear the small arguments that make up survival: how to ration the last sacks of grain, whether to send Marta to the manor for a needed mending, whether to scare the foxes away from the stored turnips. The dialogue is practiced, repeated as if the sentences were part of a liturgy, because in a long winter, practice becomes a kind of scripture. "How much do we have left of the rye?" Alda asks, trying. "Enough for dry porridge for 4 days, and the groats for a stew for 2, Tomas answers, counting silently, the numbers given like prayers. "Send Marta to barter at dawn," says Brother Ewan, voice low and steady. "She is quick with hands and words." "She will not go with empty pockets," Alda replies, teeth brittle with the cold. "Who will mend the net if not her?" "The manor has people for mending," Tomas says, though he shrugs and does not look away from Alda. "But they do not share freely. If the Lord asks for a hog in payment, we will give him curds instead," Alda says. "We must hold meat for the children." "Children need warmth more than meat some nights," Brother Ewan says. "A blanket over a mother keeps 2 alive sometimes." Tomas lifts his chin toward the smoke-blackened roof. "We will close the eaves tonight, pile straw against the north wall. If the wind finds the cracks, it will take the breath from the house." "You have always sounded like a man who can find breath where there is none," Alda answers, and there is a softness in that. The conversation moves in soft repetitions, practical and intimate, as if each voice lays a stone in a wall that must not fall. There is light laughter too, brittle and careful, that makes the kettle rattle as if startled. Around them other villagers move, making small adjustments, folding furs, mending seams with fingers bright from soapless water. You feel the heat from the fire like a small animal against your ankles, a consolation that hums through the room. Food is small and ritual. In the next house over, Marta sits by a table with a candle stub and a pile of salted fish. Her hands are steady in the way of those who have learned to measure decay and patience. The village works like a long machine, in which everyone is a gear. Grain must be kept dry, barley stored above floor level, and roots packed in a way that allows breath but denies rot. Suspended from a beam, a net of fat dried meat swings and smells faintly of smoke and iron. You watch as Marta measures portions onto a flat wooden spoon and wraps them in cloth for trade. She knows how to split a poor loaf so that everyone has a square piece. She knows how to hide a scrap for an infant in the lining of a sleeping parcel. A man named Hugh checks the granary trapdoor, loans what he must, and records what he cannot spare. The social ledger, though unrolled only in whispers and fingers closing coins, is enforced by shame and mutual need. The village has rules that are older than any household. For instance, there is a superstition that you must never leave a threshing floor empty at dusk, that the night spirits will take not only grain, but also goodwill. Another belief insists that one must keep a small bowl of milk at each threshold for an odd spirit called the hearthling. If she is forgotten, the smoke will ride up and choke the room. These tidbits of survival function as small legalities that the community honors because they bring cohesion. A nameless man with a scar on his cheek, Rurik, tells a story of the last winter that broke the mill. He remembers the miller lashing planks to the wheel to keep water moving under ice, and the long row of villagers who came to shove with poles and tied ropes to sleds to shift grain from one house to another. You hear of agreements with neighboring hamlets, of brothers-in-law who promised a sack of grain in spring in return for blankets in the dead of winter. The economy of cold houses is a ledger of favors and promises. "Do you remember the year the river froze and the wheel stopped?" Rurik asks, leaning on his staff, the light catching at the ridge of his nose. "I remember the rats coming through the thatch like a small comet," says Ingrid, who keeps the preserved fruits. "We burned the lower thatch and stitched the patches with cord. We built a sled chain and hauled the flour from over the ridge," Marta says. "There were 15 of us, and we sang so badly we startled the fox." "Songs are good against sleeping too deep," Tomas says. "They measure the hour when hunger bites. They are better than counting." "You would sing for me any time," Alda says, and the laughter that follows is a thin line between hope and despair. The social order shows in gestures, small and large, in who carries what, in who sits nearest the heat. Animals are part of the furnace. The barn is an extension of the house where breath and body find a joint economy. Cattle stand shoulder to shoulder, their dense bodies a moving wall against wind. Chickens are kept inside on the worst nights, under straw and hay and the soft density of collected heat. You smell the barn long before you see it. The scent is a layered thing of manure and warm wool, and a sweetness like cut grass, mixed with the tang of hay. Sigrid tends the animals, patting a flank and holding a warm bottle to a calf that will not raise its head. She knows a ritual of rubbing a damp ear and warming a hoof by pressing it gently to her own thigh. The animals give up heat and muscle for the household. In return, they are sheltered. There's a complicated choreography to feeding through a long winter. Who eats first? Which animals are called early to avoid waste? Which are kept to breed when the thaw finally loosens the soil? The barn is where practical thinking meets affection. A child will fall asleep on a straw pallet under a cow's flank in harsh weather because the animal's heat is a trusted furnace. At the barn door, a practical conversation plays out in quick and repeated exchanges. "Are the oats rationed?" asks Sigrid, voice bright with concentration. "They are," replies Hugh. "2 handfuls per cow at dusk, 1 handful at morn. Spare barley for the mare." "If the mare stumbles, we have no sledge for the market," says Rurik. "Then what of the salt and the wool we need?" "We mend the runners," Tomas says. "We borrow the tools. We do not sell the mare." "We will not sell the mare," Sigrid says firmly. "She pulls for the winter and will pull for the spring." The market and festivals become pages of relief. When the village gathers for a small winter fair, the air changes. Pockets of warmth gather where bodies and trade meet. You hear the clatter of haggling, the creak of boots on packed snow, the bright smell of baked flatbreads that have been kept for the occasion, the sharp bite of cider handed in tin cups.
The fair is a place where stories and small luxuries are exchanged. You will meet a spinner who dyes yarn with lichen, and an old woman who keeps a jar of spiced honey that she claims wards off the cough. Names are stitched across this social cloth. Marta, who bargains crisply. Alda, who trades mending for thread. Brother Ewan, who says a blessing over the ale. Hugh, who trades tools. Ingrid, who offers smoked fruit. The festival allows people to trade heat in the form of things: boiled drinks, woolen caps, songs that last into the velvet nights. "You must try this ginger wine," a merchant calls, pressing a cup into your palm. The drink smells of roasted root and something like candied peel. "It will warm your chest for a while," he promises. "Is it truly ginger?" you ask. "It is ginger and an old monk's recipe," he says, smiling as if such a thing were likewise a saint. "And a little honey, for sweetness to hold the throat." "You give faith to the brewer," Marta says, and both of them laugh. The fair is noisy, full, and for the span of an evening it feels as if the winter could be postponed. Religion and ritual are serious business, and they function both as psychological support and social ordering device. The small stone church has a long bench that smells of beeswax and damp wool. Monks and nuns keep lists and pray for harvest and herd. There are rites unique to winter: the blessing of stones that will be used as bed warmers, the laying of a loaf at the church threshold for the poor, the practice of carrying a heated stone in a cloth to bed for a fevered child. A curious practice is the use of hot stones placed in a shallow pit and wrapped with cloth to warm bedding quickly, a method that is at once ingenious and risky. The congregation murmurs while a bell rings to call for the vigil. Candles drip onto stone, and the walls hold the warmth like memory. People kneel and make small vows: to lend a blanket, to keep a child, to watch another's hearth if a household falls ill. The rituals are not empty gestures. They are recorded in monastery ledgers and later in the thin, careful pages that will become the chronicles. They are, in effect, an ancient social insurance. The castle above the village has its own strange winter, a world of firs and guarded windows that is both comfortable and brittle. The lords and their attendants keep uncomfortable habits of ceremony that make warmth showy, but also create distance. Servants traverse cold stone passageways with torches and thick cloaks, while the great hall holds a fire that is kept deliberately huge as a sign of prestige. But even here the cold intrudes. There are debates about who to feed, whether to provide for the winterers at the manor, whether the tithe will be offered. A pale steward named Hewson consults ledgers by the firelight and weighs the consequences of giving too much and creating dependency versus withholding and provoking dissent. Nobility can purchase warmth. They can buy more wood, more furs, better rooms. Yet their moral calculus is a tense thing, because generosity is also a display and a mechanism to keep laborers. Inside the castle, a lady named Lady Maud smooths the hem of an embroidered cloak and wonders whether to send her maid with care packages to the village below. A maintenance dialogue unfolds between steward and lady in the hush of the lordly hall. "If we send grain, we will set precedent," Hewson says, counting on eyes more than fingers. "The precedent is our father's conscience," Lady Maud answers. "He did not hoard when the river froze. He opened the pantry, and men remembered it for 10 winters. The men may come to expect it," Hewson says. "They may come in droves, and the sacks will empty, and a lord without a store is a lord with no teeth." "A lord must have teeth shaped by mercy," she says. "What would be the cost of refusing a child a bread?" Hewson sighs and looks to the windows, where the wind scours the snow against stone. "There are more subtle things we can send: blankets, medicine, someone to teach colder people how to salt better. Little acts avoid the spectacle. Then send the seamstress, send the monk with his paper, send what the people can translate into habit, not a show. The cloth of power is not all about show. It is also about responsibility, and the lords know that their reputations are a currency almost as real as grain. Travel in winter is a ledger of risks. When journeys are required, men and women dress in layers, traveling with sledges and fur, and packing food that keeps under cold. A technical description of packing for a winter journey goes like this. Each
traveler rolls up garments in layers separated by oiled cloth to keep out moisture, places a strip of birch bark beneath furs to repel damp, packs compact blocks of dense hard bread and smoked meat in oilcloth, and secures the load to a sled with rope looped and knotted to prevent shifting. Such meticulously arranged bundles will decide whether a party reaches shelter before hunger or frost catch them. You learn the names of useful knots, of which ropes to trust when ice shifts, and the way to find shelter in a row of boulders or a hollowed tree root. A caravan led by a man named Rurik takes a route that skirts the worst winds, and another party led by a woman named Sigrid tests ice thickness with a pole rather than foolish bravado. In the long moving scene of a winter journey, dialogues become exchanges of course and survival. "How far to the crossing?" asks a young guide named Edda, shading her eyes against a glare that makes the snow sparkle and disorient. 3 hours with a clear trail, Rurik says, checking the sled runners. If the ice is thin at the ford, we go inland and wrap the sled with bell rope to anchor it. "Anchor how?" Edda asks sharply. "We loop the rope through the runners and tie to a planted stake," Rurik says. "If the ice gives, the sled keeps its line, and we lose only a load rather than life." "Who will test ahead?" Sigrid asks, voice taut. "I will," Rurik answers. "I test, and if the sound is hollow, we pull back and use the longer way." Edda nods and lays her hand on a strap. "Then we go slow and sing and count, sing and keep the mind steady." The singing is a measured thing, a counting device that keeps the caravan together. They proceed like a living rope, each voice a knot. Moments of tension sharpen into small crises that test the moral fabric of the community. There are at least 3 nights when the village must decide difficult things. The first is when a fever passes through a family and strangers whisper about quarantine. The second occurs when a pack of wolves comes too close and the villagers must decide who will stand watch. The third surfaces when a child is lost for a day and found near a frozen pond, and everyone must confront their limits. Each moment is a small novel in itself, decisions made in half-lit rooms, choices between comfort and courage, memories that press like tight hands. The fever crisis is a slow burning knot. When a coughing takes hold and a child's cheeks grow glassy, the community debates whether to isolate the household and let its people starve slowly, or to keep the sick within the house and risk contagion. Brother Iwan insists that care is a religious duty. Thomas says the granary ledger cannot withstand an outbreak. Alda remembers the story of a plague-worn spring and the way neighbors close doors. And she thinks of the child and knows she cannot add his breath to a ledger. The argument unfurls in the space between heart and ledger until a decision is made to rotate watchers at the threshold and to send a small ration to the quarantined house under cover of night. This choice costs sleep and comfort, but keeps the fever from breaking out across the whole settlement. In the Night of Wolves, the village shows a different shape. Rurik and Tomas volunteer to keep watch. They walk with spears tipped with iron and bells strung across a line of firs to make more noise than a single patrol could. There is a small, tense dialogue in the dark that lasts for hours. "Do you hear them now?" Rurik asks, squinting into a field that seems to move with breath and white shapes. "Only the wind on the reeds," Tomas answers, though his hand tightens. "Keep the bell near the rafters," Rurik whispers. "If they circle the barn, we beat the pans and frighten them. Then we will wake the dogs," Tomas says. "If they bite, we will lose an animal. If they do not, we will have kept the herd." The choice is between immediate loss and potential massacre. The men choose to risk one animal and to protect the possibility of more lives. The crisis with the child at the pond is the most personal. A neighbor named Ingrid wakes to find her smallest missing, and the villagers spread in a thin search. The sound of boots on snow turns to a frantic tangle as the child is found, blue and half lying on thin ice,
and a quick chain of hands pulls the small body to safety. For a long time after, the community sits in the warm hall and talks about how fragile life is when the cold eats at the edges. They wrap the child in warmed linens, press a cup of sweetened broth into tiny hands, and decide that the old rule about not letting children play near water must be strictly enforced. It is a small law made heavy with fear and love. In the midst of these trials, the backstory of the protagonist rises, revealing a life shaped by cold and choices. You learn in 3 or 4 short paragraphs that your protagonist was raised at the edge of a moor, where winters were a craft. As a youth, your hands learned to read weather by the way the fur lay, and learned to shape a sled runner so it would not split. You carry the memory of a mother who taught you to lay moss under pails to keep them from freezing overnight, and a father who once traded his cloak to bring home a live hen in spring. You also remember the time you left for a trading town and found that there the cold was a rumor rather than a life. And you returned feeling like a stranger in your own home because the city had taught you to measure value in coin but not in warmth. This return is the engine of your choices. You use your city knowledge to help improve storage and to introduce a method of salting barley that keeps it longer, and you feel the friction of being both insider and outsider. Your backstory holds heavier memories as well, a darker seam that explains some of your nervousness when travel is necessary. You lost a sibling to a winter flood when you were young, a night when the ice gave and a path dissolved into black water. The memory of that loss is a place you will visit in dreams and when decisions scorch like cold, and it makes you both careful and quick to anger when decisions risk children. There is also a hidden soft corner where a love once started with a traveler and was never finished because the traveler left with the spring thaw and never returned. That absence has left a small, steady ache that you cover with work and devotion to the village. A co-protagonist, Brother Ewan, has his own backstory stitched into his hands. He was once a scribe in a monastery far away and left because he could not watch people record the suffering of others without doing anything. His hands are ink-stained and his memory lives in lists of donated grain, names of those who died in past winters, and the way a bell can be used for both prayer and alarm. His faith is pragmatic, and though he advocates for prayer, he also carries tools and stitches broken things when needed. Together, you and Brother Ewan make a peculiar pair of thinker and doer, both shaped by memory and necessity. The castle and the manor produce moral tension that must be settled by negotiation. A man of the manor, a steward, must decide whether to take a portion of grain to feed an extravagant table or to send it to the village during a harsh deep freeze. This decision ripples through households below. Lady Maud eventually persuades the steward with a memory of her father giving grain the winter the mill stopped. She tells of the way the men returned later with cords mended and their loyalty given back. The steward chooses to send a modest allotment and a seamstress to teach mending. It is a small act of charity that preserves a social bond and keeps the order from unraveling into outright reprisal. There are also necessary technicalities in medicine and domestic care that are described with precise attention. When frostbite takes hold, the immediate procedure is to remove wet clothing, wrap the affected limb in warm dry cloth, apply gentle friction with warm palms, and administer small sips of heated broth to raise internal temperature. A heated stone is placed against the feet, but only after the skin begins to loosen. If blisters form, they are gently opened with a clean needle, and the wound is dressed with a salve of rendered fat and powdered herbs, which serves to protect against infection and keep the skin supple. This technical understanding is spread by Brother Ewan and a wandering healer named Marta, who has the authority of experience rather than lettered script. Moments of community resilience show how social rituals save more than bodies. The village organizes a rota to keep fires burning in the worst nights so that no single house will exhaust its wood. They perform a small ritual called the night sweep, in which a group goes house to house, sweeping off the thresholds and stirring the embers so the fires do not die. The festival of midwinter holds a symbolic sharing of the last of the honey, where each family places a spoonful in a communal bowl, and from that sharing, the belief grows that the village will make it through the worst. These rituals are both psychological and practical. They create obligations that become translated into action. The long arc pushes toward a climactic week when the river runs thin with ice, and the little community must choose to support or abandon the road to the neighboring market. If they fail to reach the market, the village loses a planned round of trade and may face long-term shortages. A band of villagers organizes, bundles supplies into sleds, and set out under a pale day that is bright enough to blind as snow reflects the light. The dialogue among the travelers is dense and practical. Pack the salted meat near the center, Alda says. Keep the boiled bread on top for immediate use. Bring the bell rope, Rurik says. If ice breaks, we ring and pull. Who brings the ladder? Sigrid asks. Ingrid will, Tomas says. She is small enough to fit between crevices and brave enough to climb. On the way, weather turns, and the group faces the worst wind they have seen. The low conversation becomes a rhythm of commands and reassurance. Their voices grow thin and small against the howl. They find shelter in a hollow near a line of firs, and set a fire low and protected. Stories are told to keep minds moving. The tale of the old man who hollowed a log and kept it full of embers for a week, the trick of stubbing a candle in lard to protect it. It is in these small stories that instruction and culture combine. The caravan survives because knowledge is shared. The crisis of travel is resolved not by brute force but by social cunning. They trade a small cask of ale to a traveler who knows a hidden ford, and he shows them a path that avoids the thin ice. The village arrives back with some losses, but more with their strengths intact. The return triggers a week of rebuilding, mending, and the slow gathering of spring hope. As winter loosens, there are signs.
The snow begins to crust, and then to slough, trickling into small streams that mark the land with new sound. Children find thin green shoots where bulbs push against soil that had seemed dead. This slow shift invites an epilogue that tells of what happened in 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months, moments that give closure and a sense of change. 1 month later, the village has a new registry of commitments. The boy who almost died at the pond is stronger, cheeks pink again, and Alda stitches a tiny heart of cloth into his cap as a promise of care. The healers and Brother Ewan have mapped a new rule, a watcher rota at water edges and a night patrolling schedule. Small structural improvements have been made to the granary. Hugh and Tomas nailed extra boards and lined the floor with birch to keep damp from the grain. There is an undercurrent of gratitude that turns into plans rather than performances. People speak of the winter as a test they passed, and the stories told around fires are less about fear and more about the cleverness that kept them. There is a modest trade in cured fish and dried fruits as spring goods are prepared for sale. Children run again, less cautious in their play. The manor sends a seamstress who teaches mending circles, and the habit of shared care is strengthened. 3 months later, the earth softens. The small creek that once hummed under ice grows bolder and carries the debris of the thaw down to where the mill can once again turn. The miller comes back from a temporary exile and tests the wheel. There are celebrations. A bread is baked that is too sweet for ordinary days because it has molasses and raisins saved for the event. Lady Maud organizes a modest feast that is not extravagant but is deliberate in the way of having each household present a dish to be shared. The festival marks both gratitude and economic recovery. Old debts are repaid in small measures, and new agreements are written with ink and witnesses. The village begins to plan for the next winter with new knowledge. They add more shelves to the granary. They seal cracks in eaves, and they plant more rootstock that can be harvested late in the season. 6 months after the deep freeze, the long arc has turned into a season of planting and cautious growth. The fields are tilled with the memory of winter as both teacher and scar.
The child who nearly froze runs, fully recovered, and Brother Ewan writes the event into a small chronicle that he sends to the neighboring priory. Rurik marries his promised bride, and the hall is full of music, a sound that had been rare in the cold months. The manor works in concert with the village to create a reserve of grain in a high place that will not flood. It is a small, pragmatic innovation and a
sign that both memory and institution can adapt. You feel that the community has learned the cost of indifference and the advantage of precaution. People speak of that winter for years, and the stories become an education passed to the young. In closing, the warmth that saved this village was not only the fire under the pot or the heat of an animal on a midnight pallet. It was the way people counted favors, how they sang to keep time, how they traded an ale for a crossing, how they risked a little to save much. Alda, Thomas, Brother Ewan, Marta, Hugh, Ingrid, Rorik, Sigrid, and others are names that carry the village in their hands. The world you walk through shows how seasons sharpen character, how a cold that threatens can also be the crucible of community. If you were moved by this journey, if it made your own nights feel different, subscribe for more quiet travels into lived history and leave a comment naming the coldest night you remember or a winter tradition from your family. Your stories keep these memories alive. Remember to keep a small bowl by your threshold, to mend before the snow, and above all, to share a little heat when you have it. The embers die if not tended, but memory keeps the fire burning, soft and persistent, an intelligence learned from frost and generous hands.